I'm very grateful to be with all of you. This is a very special occasion, and it's very clear to me this is a very special church. I'm glad to have that opportunity. I told James that because this was so last minute, that I wasn't going to try to come up with something overnight, that I'd go back to something maybe I had preached before. And I hope that's all right, that we depart from the lectionary for a week and look at this, although there are many connections between this story and especially what we have read together from Ephesians, the first chapter. You know, one of the things that I always enjoyed when I owned a home was going out and trimming hedges. Seems strange, doesn't it? But my wife would say I could spend all morning outside just trimming away with hedges. And I don't use electric shears for trimming hedges. I use the old-fashioned hedges because I stand back and I look at them and I snip here and I snip there until they're absolutely perfect. And then I take about a half an hour just to admire my work. Because I really like the way I do hedges. It seems rather strange, doesn't it? I was thinking about that a long, long time ago, about 25 years ago, when I went out to my parents' home in suburban Detroit. Because of all the things that I wanted to do, I wanted to help my dad with some things, and I thought, I'll just go out. I noticed his hedges the last time I was home, coming from Chicago to Detroit, and they were a mess. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to go and trim that up. That'll be my gift to my dad. And so there I was on a cool, crisp October morning, trimming hedges out there in front, and just enjoying the beautiful weather, enjoying the effort, enjoying being able to do what I thought was a work of art. And at the same time recalling how much I hated to trim hedges as a kid. Now, it wasn't just hedges, I hated chores. Even the word chore just grates on me. Occasionally my wife will say, okay, Smitty, time to do the chaws. She'll say the chaws. And I'll say to her, oh, please don't use that word. Call it any other thing. Call it work, call it task. Please don't call it chores. Because it just, I automatically am turned off by that. My dad taught me how to trim hedges. And he would take me out to the bushes. I did them in the spring and in the fall, when they were overgrown in the spring with new growth, and in the fall when they needed to be trimmed back for the winter. But the problem is, like Abraham Lincoln, who said, my father taught me how to do work, he just didn't teach me how to enjoy it. I didn't learn how to enjoy trimming hedges. When I was a kid, I hated to do chores. Every Saturday morning, my father would post a list of chores for all 4 of his children on the refrigerator. I never went to my dad and said, hey, can I go do such and such, go with my friends, go bowling, do anything, that my father didn't say, always, have you finished your chores? And so I didn't even bother asking unless I had. And you could tell how much I hated chores by the way I did them. I always waited till the last minute. Sometimes I remember one time actually trimming hedges in a thunderstorm. Pouring rain. But my father was due home in a half an hour, and I was not going to have him walking out on the porch and seeing me with it still undone. I had no real concern for quality, no real concern for how it would look in the end. Just finish the chore as quickly as possible. And I certainly found no joy in my work. In fact, I didn't just trim hedges, I attacked them. My father would hand me those, and I would go and I would cut hedges all day. People who walked down the sidewalk didn't want to get near me because I had that weapon in my hand. But I would go and hedges all the time. They've got to be just right. And he's going to be home in a few days. And why do I have to do this? And somehow that just sort of helped that moment, you know. My only concern was in doing chores was what was going to be my reward. And it was relatively small looking back now, but it seemed large then. My father never let me use the electric trimmers. He had electric trimmers, he just didn't let me use them. Maybe it was because he watched me attacking the hedges and thought he didn't want to have a headline in the newspaper that says, local boy electrocuted trimming hedges in a thunderstorm. So it wouldn't allow me to use those kinds of things, and so I had to go out and attack the hedges with that most primitive implement. So he taught me how to do it with hand shears. And when I didn't do it right, when he would come home from work and I was all done, and I was looking at my work thinking, there is all accomplished, and I'd be standing there with the shears, resenting the work that I've done, I would hear the footsteps. This man, beautifully, wonderfully dressed in a suit, wingtip shoes, had a particular gait in the way he walked. As he would say to me when I got my first pair of shoes, real dress shoes, and we would walk to church and he would say, son, heel toe, heel toe, heel toe. And so that's the way he walked, and you could hear his gait. And so I would hear those steps coming up behind me, and I knew when I turned around what I would see. He would be waving his arms and saying, no, 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 that's not how you trim the edges. Oh, I hated that. And then he would take the trimmers, and he would take me, and he would show me how to eye the trim, and trim along to be sure that they were just right, and then go back and eye the hedges, and then trim a little bit more, and eye the hedges and a little bit up. And he loved to do chores, and he could do that for an hour, which was agonizing for me. But that's what it was like. So when I first heard the story about the prodigal son, I identified with him. I knew how he felt. Life for me was just chores. It was just one thing after another, a long list of have-tos. I have to do this, and I have to be in by curfew, and I have to go to bed at a certain time. When I was an adolescent, you have to take a shower every day. That was the attitude of the younger son. He felt himself fenced in by obligations and by duties. How he longed to be free, how he longed to be away from his father, because his father was all about duties and obligations. If he could get away from him, he'd be away from all the have-tos in his life. How he longed to go to the land of, I don't have to. Don't we all? Think of the number of times that as growing up we long to go to the land of I don't have to. I want to go to college. I want to get away from my parents. I want to go as far away as possible. I really believe that my children chose their college by the distance it was from their home, and not whether it was a good school or not. So why does it have to be North Carolina? It just does, Dad. It just does. So off she went. To go to the land of I don't have to. What time did you get in last night? Oh, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. How come you came in so late? Well, I don't. How come you didn't come in at curfew? I don't have to. Or I'd go to my son when he was in college and I'd say, son, these sheets on your bed are kind of crunchy. Have you changed them at all this semester? And I knew what the answer would be. No, I don't have to. And so over and over again, it's one of the reasons why we'd like to be wealthy, because there'd be a host of things that we could say, I don't have to. That's what the son longed for. And then came that surprising response from his father, even though he rudely says to his father, I wish I had the inheritance now, which was in effect to say to his father, I wish you were already gone. And then to his surprise, one day his father said, take the money and run. You can go now. Divided up his property and gave his inheritance to the younger son. You know, if there's anything that human beings we fail to take as seriously as God does, it's our freedom. That we have the freedom in every circumstance to do as we please. And perhaps the most faithful decision that God ever made in creation was to allow us our freedom. In fact, the only way we could have it is if God allowed it. Which means that in God's grace, He allows us even to refuse and to rebel against that grace. Well, life in the land of don't have to can seem pretty liberating, pretty empowering, at least for a while. It's so great to stay out late. It's so great to spend any kind of money. It's so great to do whatever you please, to not have anyone hovering over you saying, you have to do this, and you have to do that, and you have to do this, and to know that you're in the land of I don't have to. It's kind of heady. The problem, though, is that the further you get away from the have-tos of God and the have-tos of life, the further you move from the wisdom and presence of God. Because they're inseparable. The truth is that life is full of have-tos because we live in a cause and effect world. If we fail to do certain things, we may not get the results that we want to get. The laws and obligations that we have in life aren't just arbitrary rules. They're not just hoops that we have to jump through, but they're the natural consequences of the way we live our lives. If you want to be healthy, well, you have to eat right, or you have to exercise. If you want to have good kids, you have to love them and discipline them and raise them right. That requires a lot of have-tos. If you want to have a good marriage, you have to be loving and respectful to your spouse. If you want to grow spiritually, you have to trust God and obey God's commands. There are a lot of things in life that are just organically arranged that way. They're kind of like the law of gravity. You don't break the law of gravity, it invariably breaks us. By the same token, although life in the land of have-to can be a better standard of living, but not too pleasant. It may not be very rewarding or very fulfilling. There may not be much joy in the life of have-to. We get so focused on doing everything that God commands of us that sometimes we get to the point of seeing everything in life as commands rather than grace. We fail to see they're all expressions of God's grace and God's love in our life. Usually we think that having obligations in life, especially towards God, makes us legalistic in our output, but it doesn't. Because God's grace should free us from every sense of obligation and duty in the sense of working for God. But legalism isn't about whether we have obligations or not. Legalism is about the way we regard those duties and obligations. Jesus said it's about our hearts. It's about our attitude. I'm reminded of the Apostle Paul's words in 1 Corinthians 13 as he spoke about devotion. Remember what he said? Even if I give away all that I possess to the poor and sacrifice my body to the flames, that I may boast. All these things, God, I have done for you. But do not have love, I gain nothing. As Paul says, I say nothing, I am nothing, I gain nothing. In other words, it's all in vain when the fruit of obedience is apart from genuine devotion. I'm reminded of that in Jesus' story, the story of Jesus and Peter in the last chapter of John. When Jesus has breakfast with Peter and asks him a series of 3 times, Peter, do you love me? I just need to know, do you love me? And each time he says that, Jesus says, well then feed my sheep, care for my lambs. There's a command. Once they settle that question of devotion, everything else after that is a command that Peter is perfectly willing to follow. You see, all the commands of God are intended to bring us closer to God's heart, to the person of God. But when we separate obedience from genuine devotion, we just end up with selfish pride. Perhaps it's so we can boast of all that we're doing for God. Or in the words of the older brother, perhaps it's to be able to boast, all these things I have done for you, God. Now, what are you going to do for me? And we begin to think maybe that obedience is a way for us to earn our way into relationship. I think of a friend of mine who once told me the story, the sort of formative story of his youth. He was swimming, he was surfing with friends in California, and the undertow pulled him out and he drowned. And they pulled him to shore, gave him CPR, and brought him back to life. And I'll never forget him looking at me in the eye and pointing his finger at me and saying, and you know what? After that day, every single breath that I took was a gift of grace. And I looked at him and I said, what about all the breaths before that? Did you earn those? You see, it didn't suddenly become true that every breath was a gift of grace. It only became true that you suddenly realized it by being brought back to life. And sometimes we talk about the have-tos in our faith in order to substitute obedience for a relationship with God. It sounds strange, but I think it happens to a lot of us. Soon God becomes little more than a philosophy or a theology or a concept rather than an authentic relationship. If you were to ask me why I think young people are walking away from the church, that's what I'd point to. We are not helping them build a personal relationship with God. Instead, what we're trying to do is influence their theology, their thinking, and their practice. Which may explain why it is that when God shows up, it's not with a few more chapters in the law, it's in the person of Jesus. I've always wanted to write a sequel to the story. One time I sat down and I wrote sequels to several of the parables. I even thought about publishing it. My wife read it and said, don't. But I've always imagined what the day after would be in this story. Here's what I imagine. I imagine that you hear the rooster crow off in the distance, the sun is about to rise, and you hear stirring going on in the house. And somebody's in there making breakfast for everyone else. And after breakfast is made and all prepared and it's laid out for everyone that's going to go out in the fields, we look in the distance as the sun is rising. We can see the shadow of this one sort of jauntily walking along, off to the fields, off to work, and you realize it's the younger son because it's his first day of work. It's his first day of getting to go to work. Any of you been unemployed? I was unemployed. Spent about a year being unemployed. Scared to death. And then I spent time working contracts here and there, part-time arrangements over the next few years to try to hold the family together and pay bills and do all that kind of stuff. Now at the place where I work at CASA of Travis County as the director of volunteers, my boss will regularly call me in and say, look, you can't be working all these hours. You're working way too many hours. And I said, no, you don't understand. I get to work all these hours. I don't have to do this. And as long as I'm not in trouble, I'll probably keep working all those hours. For the first time in his life, the young son doesn't have to go to work anymore. He gets to. There's something wonderful in our lives when suddenly that switch takes place. There's something wonderful that happens. You know, you don't have to change your address. You don't have to change your job. You don't even have to change clothes. You just have to change your mind. And realize that everything that seems like a have to is really a get to. And everything in your life will be transformed. You might even find yourself enjoying things that you used to hate. Like chores. Trimming hedges. Which is what I was thinking on that day when I finished up and was admiring my work and thinking, what a transformation. I remember when I hated to do this and I didn't do it very well. And as I was thinking that, I heard the footsteps. Only this time the footsteps weren't the confident stride of a man in wingtips. They were slippers of a man in his bathrobe and slippers in the last 6 months of his battle with cancer. By springtime, he would be gone. And as he walked up behind me and I could hear those not quite as confident shuffling along of his footsteps, but I knew when I turned around what I'd see. And he didn't disappoint me. As soon as he did, I saw him going, no, 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 no! You don't have to do that. I said, I know,